I shared with a group of Presbyterian pastor colleagues this past week that the past few months have been some of the most consequential in my 30 years of ordained ministry. Coronavirus, economic crisis, social distancing and its effects on us, political turmoil, racial tension, and the arrival now this week of the presidential election. And I confess to a feeling of inadequacy to this moment, a struggle to speak truth when the very idea of truth is up for debate, a moment of inadequacy, a struggle, and a yearning to create connections across seemingly disparate worldviews, and also a realization that the words, no matter how well intended, create the very division they were striving to overcome. So I shared with this group of my friends and colleagues and partners in ministry a growing awareness, as odd as it is to say, of the significance of preaching. Not in the sense of reaching an apparently large crowd of people, nor even necessarily in the sense of a well-crafted sermon that might change minds or might transform the world, or even one that makes that much of a difference in the whole scheme of things. The significance, the importance, I think, is that vital meaning of this intersection between our Holy Scriptures, as messy and as complicated and as complex as they are, this intersection of those Holy Scriptures with the world itself, as messy and as complex and as complicated as the world is. So the significance of a sermon is not its entertainment value, it's not its capacity to tell people how to be moral or how to be kind or more just or even more compassionate. Those are good things. They are things we seek in our lives. No, the significance, I think, of a sermon is its capacity to peel away our assumptions, to strip away our personal rationalizations and justifications, to provide an encounter with something bigger, something more profound, something more meaningful than we ever imagined. The past few months have brought home to me the significance of this preaching, the significance of preaching, however inadequately I may do it, preaching as an encounter with the living God of grace. The Beatitudes we read this morning are the opening salvo probably to the most significant sermon Jesus ever gave, ever preached. We call that sermon the Sermon on the Mount, and it covers 2 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. And it contains such profound ideas as things like not judging others, or loving your enemies, or letting go of anger and fear and anxiety. And that sermon is certainly a call and invitation to live a kind of radical vulnerability that's filled with faith and with trust in God. Mahatma Gandhi once said that the message of Jesus, as he understands it, is contained in its entirety in the Sermon on the Mount. And Gandhi said if he had to face only the Sermon on the Mount in his interpretation of it, he could call himself a Christian. And he goes on to say, but negatively, I can tell you in my humble opinion, what passes as Christianity is a negation of the Sermon on the Mount. And I wonder, like Gandhi, what the world would be like if we lived the Sermon on the Mount. So the blessings we read this morning are the opening salvo of Jesus' sermon, his attempt to bring people in. And it's a very odd kind of blessings. It's a puzzling reversal of how we might think the world works. Leighton Williams, he's a Presbyterian pastor, and a writing about this text, calls these things the upside-down blessings. And he asserts that it is significant that Jesus begins the sermon here with these inverted blessings. And Williams writes, Jesus begins by centering those who suffer, those who remain faithful in the face of hardship, those who focus themselves on compassion and care for others, on justice and righteousness, on making true peace for a better world for all. He centers those at the very beginning of the sermon. And these are not the groups of people that our world tends to favor or exalt. He goes on to write, in our dog-eat-dog world, the spoils go to the victor, the glory to the powerful. We celebrate those who are dominant, aggressive, and competitive. We reward those who prioritize themselves. Meanwhile, we avoid those who are suffering. We reject calls for justice and peace. And we see self-emptying concern for others as weakness. The upside-down blessings of Jesus are an invitation to encounter the upside-down God of grace, especially, I think, in these days of pandemic and turmoil. It's an invitation when we are so poor in spirit, so at the end of our rope, so overwhelmed by it all that God's kingdom and presence at that moment surrounds us. It's an invitation in the midst of our own mourning, our own sorrow, our very grief at the hundreds of thousands who have died, that God comforts us. And we're invited into this true space of humility, this realization I think we all have in the midst of the pandemic that we cannot control everything. In fact, there's so little that we control what is happening. That even then, in that humility, we realize God is creating a new heaven and a new earth. And it's an invitation in the midst of our deep hunger and thirst for goodness and what is just and what is right, that God will satisfy us. It's a pretty good start to a sermon. This is the promise and reality of these upside-down blessings. And you know, you don't have to take my word for it. Because today of all days, when we remember the saints who have gone before us, we remember those who knew those blessings in their lives. Now, to be clear, we call those who have lived the faith saints not because they were perfect, or not because they were morally impeccable, or because they were spiritually unflawed, because we know that to not be true. No, we call them saints because these people we remember today in our service later, those we remember in our hearts today, witnessed in their own lives these upside-down blessings. They passed them on to us by the lives they lived. In their moments of spiritual poverty and despair, in their moments of mourning and humility, and their moments of hunger for the good and just, they experienced and saw God more profoundly, more intimately than we can imagine. And so, they are our upside-down saints. And this is important to remember these days, these upside-down saints, not for any idea of perfection, but for the truth their life witnessed to, the truth that no matter what life throws at us, no matter the challenges of the world, God sustains and blesses. If you think about it, these saints stretch back thousands of years, times of pestilence and pandemics, times of conflict and war, times of deep despair and grief and fear and uncertainty, and they witness to us today. They now live in God's kingdom more fully. They know comfort, they know mercy, they see God, they are called the children of God. These upside-down saints are our witnesses, our assurance to the God of grace. So I invite you in this coming week, this Tuesday, whether you have voted or not, whether you're going into that place to go vote, to carry with you those upside-down saints. To have the faith in the midst of your own poverty of spirit and your own uncertainty and hopelessness, and your own mourning and grief of what's going on, and your own reality of humility that there's not much that a vote may change, in your own hungering and thirsting for what is good and right, that you will believe, like those upside-down saints, God makes a new world. So go, the full and pure heart, offering mercy and compassion, seeking peace and possibility, hungering for the good and just, and rejoice and be glad. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.